Hello, I'm Kristen McNamara, Managing Editor of ABRN Magazine. I'm here today with Robert Hornito, who's the owner of Pacific Collision Equipment Company in Signal Hill, California, and Tom Ballier, who's Sales and Technical Manager for Orange and San Diego counties. And they're here with us today to talk about the importance of suspension diagnostics in the repair process and what this can really mean for your shop. So, Robert, can you tell us, why are suspension diagnostics so important?
Well, it's extremely important for the safety of the occupants in the vehicle. Obviously, if the vehicle is not aligned well, there's problems with tire wear, which is, that's important, but more importantly, the safety of the occupants in the vehicle. If there's a bump steer or if a component were to fail while going at a high rate of speed, that can be very, very dangerous. So checking your suspension is very, very important.
Tom, what do you see as some of the biggest factors that are really hindering collision repair centers when it comes to suspension?
Well, it's not having the ability to diagnose damaged suspension components up front. So mainly down the repair process line, the vehicle leaves after the framework is done or the bodywork is done, and it goes to the wheel alignment shop, which is usually off-site, and it's two guys to make one trip, and if it fails the alignment, it's got to come back, and they have to go through everything all over again, and hopefully it passes the second time around. So having some basic knowledge of how to measure suspension components, or having the equipment that can document and measure actual suspension components to provide printout, it's really beneficial to expediting the repair.
Aside from parts delays, suspension is one of the biggest delays in the body shop. That car is not going to be delivered because the last thing that they do is check the alignment. The car's been cleaned and detailed, and the customer's been called, and pickup time is scheduled, and then they do an alignment at the last minute, and we discover it's not going to take an alignment. And that just blows your whole cycle time. It just blows, everything that you've tried to do for your customer to give them great customer service and an on-time delivery. It just went out the window. So having checked the suspension up front from the very beginning, even before you even start repairing the vehicle and writing your estimate, is critical. It's just a smart way to do business again.
Now, I know wheel alignment angles can be a little bit intimidating to some technicians, so what advice can you offer to a technician who's not a wheel alignment specialist?
Don't pretend to be a wheel alignment specialist. If you don't know, you don't know, and you really don't need to know. You don't need to know wheel alignment angles. You don't need to know what the consequences are of a bad caster or bad camber or bad toe. You don't need to know that. Don't worry about that. Just stick to what you do know, which is measuring vehicles. That's what you do all the time. You measure vehicles. So now what you're going to do is take what you know about measuring and apply it to the bent parts or the straight parts of the suspension on the vehicle. It's very simple. Just break it down into small pieces. I have this component. What kind of condition is it in compared to the other side? To itself, that component itself, not compared to the vehicle, but compared to itself with the other side. So you'll see in the video what I mean by that. It's a very simple process. Very simple.
Okay. And let's take a look at the video now.
I'm Charlie Robertson from Cerritos College. Today we're talking about suspension and steering component analysis. We've got 3 steering and suspension components here, and some of them are obviously damaged and some are not so obvious. Can you tell which one is damaged? If you selected the strut as the damaged part, you've selected the obviously damaged part. In actuality, all 3 of these parts are damaged and all needed to be replaced on the car. But this one is quite obvious with a bend in the middle. The problem is that with suspension parts, you can have 0 deviation between the factory part and the one that you have on the car. If there's even a millimeter difference in position on it, it will change your alignment. The car will not pass. One of the ways of checking a lower control arm is to go from one machine surface to another and compare it to the undamaged side of the car. In order to do that, you could use a divider like this one. They're fairly inexpensive, and it's a fairly simple process. You put it on one machine surface, put the point on the other end, lock in those dimensions, and then compare this physically to the other undamaged side of the car or to an undamaged part that you just bought.
without knowing the extent of the impact and what travel issues that have occurred with inertia, one can never tell how the vehicle was impacted. Did it hit a curb? Did it spin out? Did it slide sideways, which caused cupping and control issues with regards to where the suspension is supposed to be positioned? So, in those cases, we can never really tell by the naked eye. It has to be done by performing these measurements to determine if, in fact, something has occurred to the structure or the steering and or suspension. SAI, data, datum, all the toe in and toe out of the vehicle, the caster and camber, all those things taken into account can never be done without just assuming. It has to be done by machine, by somebody getting underneath there and determining this stuff in the beginning.
Sent it from the body shop, and I guess they didn't look at it or something. I'll first off, you give a quick inspection before I even pull it up here, and you can see the tie rods are bent, or because most of the time you can't see things that are to the naked eye. You have to hook it up to the machine, and that's where it tells you everything. So, I go off the machine, and if it tells me the caster's pushed back way far on the right, and the guy that put the parts on before couldn't see that, then it starts getting into the frame issues with, then now you have to look at cross members, because, that's another thing you can't see from the naked eye that's bent. Being an alignment tech, you see hundreds and hundreds of cars, so you kind of get the feel of it, of where to start looking, especially when it gives you a reading, like caster or camber. You can't see what's going to be bent unless you start measuring out certain things, and this machine doesn't really measure certain parts. Like I said, it leads you in to where it tells you where the suspension's at.
So there are very simple ways to diagnose suspension. You can use, as you saw in the beginning of the video, some very basic tools. You can use string, you can use calipers, you can use tape measures, etc., etc. And those are all fantastic. And those are good basic tools and basic knowledge to get to measure things on the fly. When you need to document things, though, you need something a little bit more sophisticated that will print out the actual numbers of what is bent. And that's where measuring systems come into play. And documenting it, of course, means that now we know for certain that there is something wrong and where that something wrong is. So you don't need to know angles, you just need to know numbers. 100 millimeters versus 90 millimeters. There's 10 millimeters of difference, there's something wrong. That's the basic bottom line. Looking at the screen here, we can see that there's a number of things that we can measure, and then we can print out and have that documentation. You can send that to the insurance company, and now there's no questions asked.
Okay, so tackling suspension diagnostics in the beginning of the repair process can really help to boost efficiency in the shop. Robert, Tom, any other final thoughts about the suspension diagnostics process that you can share with our viewers today?
I think it's just it's a good business practice to measure suspension components. You're doing your customer service by, one, verifying their suspension is correct, or two, finding that there is some damage there. You could be saving lives, so it's definitely important, not just for the bottom line, but for the consumer.
And keep in mind too that measuring suspension is, again, it's not a difficult process. In particular, if you have electronic measuring as well. If you have an electronic measuring system that can measure suspension componentry for symmetry, it's very, very simple. And then you can actually have a documented piece of paper and a photograph with the measurements to show that that part is bent. And so the biggest problem is in the industry is shops are replacing parts. They'll replace one, that didn't do it. Replace another part, that didn't do it. So then they replaced everything. Okay, that took care of it, but maybe they didn't have to replace everything. If they had diagnosed the problem, they would have just replaced one or two components, sent it to the wheel alignment, it'll have been all done, everybody's happy. No waste of time. With electronic measuring, you can actually measure the components, document it, send that to the insurance company, and then there's no issues, there's no hassle. This is what's wrong with it, this is what I need to buy, this is what we have to replace, etc., etc. It just makes it so much easier. It's not really, you just have to break it down. We have a control arm, we have a spindle, we have a strut tower, we have attachment points, Are they in the right place, and are they not bent? It's very simple. A straight edge tape measure, as you saw in the video, is very simple to diagnose and calculate whether it's off or it's not. Really simple. Yeah. Make it easy. Don't overthink it.
Well, Robert, Tom, thank you so much for being here with us today. For more information on suspension diagnostics and to see what Robert's doing in his shop, you can visit his website at www.crashtools.com or visit Carliner's website at www.carliner.com. Thank you.